One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month.
Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Erin Burnett out front on CNN.
This is CNN.
Happening now, breaking news. President Biden declares Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power, escalating his rhetoric against the Kremlin leader and his war in Ukraine. The fiery speech capping Biden's visit here in Poland that included an emotional meeting with Ukrainian refugees who fled for their lives. Also breaking, new Russian airstrikes in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv while President Biden was in neighboring Poland. CNN on the scene as an attack on a fuel storage facility shot flames and thick smoke into the air. Our correspondents are covering the war from every angle with live reports from multiple locations in Ukraine as well as here in Poland. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Warsaw, and this is a special edition of The Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We're live in Warsaw, where President Biden has ramped up his rhetoric against the Russian President Vladimir Putin in a fiery speech seen around the world. Mr. Biden declaring bluntly and forcefully that Putin cannot remain in power after his bloody invasion of Ukraine. CNN senior White House correspondent Phil Mattingly it begins our coverage tonight. Phil, this was probably the most significant speech of Biden's presidency, at least so far.
Yeah, no question about it, and that was by design. White House officials and the president working over a series of days to put this speech together, carefully calibrated, carefully worded to send a very clear message, not just to Ukraine, which the president made clear the United States will stand with, not even just to Eastern Europe, where the president was standing in Warsaw, Poland, but to the entire world about the urgency and stakes of the moment. However, Wolf, it was an ad-lib line about the need for President Putin to no longer be in power that has drawn a lot of attention over the course of the last several hours. The White House taking steps to walk that line back, making clear he was not calling for regime change. But if you listen to the entirety of the speech, Wolf, there's no question about it. This was a sharp speech with a very clear design, one the president did not mince words on. Take a listen.
Yesterday, I met with the troops that are serving alongside our Polish allies to bolster NATO's frontline defenses. The reason we wanted to make clear is their movement on Ukraine don't even think about moving on one single inch of NATO territory. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
And you heard those words there again. White House officials saying that was not a push towards regime change, which the White House and top administration officials, Wolf, have been very clear for several weeks was never their intent. But there was a very clear intent to elevate this moment, this sense of time, beyond just something that's happening in Eastern Europe. This is a bigger issue and moment. The president wanted to deliver that and also underscore the point to the Western democracies that have united, I think, so thoroughly over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks, that this is going to take time. It will likely be painful, particularly in an economic sense, but it is an absolute necessity to stay together given the stakes. That was the president's goal going into the speech. White House officials believe he delivered on that goal, but certainly a lot of questions, a lot of talk about what appeared, at least at the time, to be the call for the removal of President Putin.
Yeah, and earlier in the day he called Putin a butcher. A butcher. Phil Mattingly reporting for us. Phil, thank you very, very much. There's other major developments in an especially provocative move. Russia launched airstrikes against the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where President Biden was only a couple of hundred miles away while he's here in Warsaw. CNN's Don Lemon was immediately on the scene.
Well, we moved back a little bit because you could hear the flames roaring, and what they're concerned about is another one of these tanks exploding, so they're pushing people back until they can get control of this blaze. You were mentioning how close it is to the neighborhood. It's really close to the neighborhood. It's on the other side. There's a little valley in here on the other side of a retention wall. But Peter, if you can just go around just a little bit and show them how close this is to a neighborhood real quickly, and then we'll get back on the flames. So it's really close. This is a neighborhood where everyone has gathered, all of the rescue people, and they've done this on a number of different streets. So if you'll come back here. So we're, I guess, within a tenth of a mile or so from where this is happening. But again, look at those flames. They're just roaring, black smoke coming out of there.
And Don is joining us now live. He's in Lviv. Tell us more, Don, about the scene of the strike that you saw today.
It was quite a frightening scene, and getting there was a bit chaotic. When Wolf, quite frankly, really a lot closer to the city center than any of us had expected. When we left the facility that we're in to get to the scene, it only took us a couple minutes to get to the scene, and we thought it would take us longer because it looks far away in the distance, and we were told that it was within a valley and we'd have to travel some distance. But this was really too close for comfort. We were told that this was a fuel storage facility that was hit here in Lviv, just northeast of the city, this fuel storage site. And there was another bombardment that happened, another strike that happened a little while later. This one was at a military infrastructure site. Both of these, Wolf, are in residential quarters, according to the mayor of Lviv. When this happened, there was moments before the first strike happened. We were here at the facility. Those airstrike sirens went off. They had been going off occasionally throughout the week, and they had slowed down a little bit later on in the week. We had one yesterday, and then the one this morning was the real deal. I had spoken to the mayor earlier in the week, and I said, those airstrikes keep going off, and people, are you concerned that people are going to start ignoring them, that somehow they would become immune to them, it would become background noise? He said there was a concern about that. But today was a real one, and now he is urging everyone to go into the shelters. And to quote here saying, because we don't know what is going to happen now, Wolf.
Yeah, and this was in western Ukraine, very significant. Don Lemon, excellent reporting for us. Thank you very, very much. Let's go to the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv right now. CNN's senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen is on the scene for us in Kyiv. Fred, the White House is walking back the president's direct message that Putin cannot remain in power. But how did his remarks land in Ukraine, where you are? And you also got reaction from inside Russia.
Yeah, they certainly didn't go down well in Russia, certainly not in the Kremlin. It was quite interesting because right after President Biden finished his speech, I messaged the spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, and asked him what he thought about those remarks. Obviously, President Biden, they're essentially seeming to say that Vladimir Putin needed to leave office. And I got an answer within seconds. And Dmitry Peskov said, look, it's not up to the president of the United States to decide. It's up to the Russian people to decide who their president is going to be. So clearly the Russians not happy at all with those words from President Biden. That certainly hasn't changed even after things were apparently somewhat walked back. There's been some reaction also from Ukrainian politicians. One politician came forward and she said she wasn't necessarily reassured by the words of President Biden that the rain of bombs on Ukrainian cities would stop after his speech and with some of the policies of the United States. But, speaking to senior officials here, they certainly are very grateful for the aid that the U.S. is giving, certainly for the anti-tank and the anti-air weapons that have made such a big difference in pushing the Russian forces back in so many places, especially here around the Kiev area, Wolf. And so they want that to continue. But of course, the Ukrainians would like to see even more aid in the future, Wolf.
You're in Kyiv, the capital. We've learned that Russia has apparently halted its advance around the capital city. But what's the latest that you're seeing on the ground there?
Well, you know what? There's still massive battles going on around the Kiev area. This is very much a war zone, Wolf. There's no other way to describe it. And if you look at the north of the city, there's still some heavy battles going on. The Ukrainians launching a counteroffensive. And you can see some of the video here that we filmed today. You can see there's checkpoints still throughout the entire city. As the folks here obviously still extremely wary about the situation. And still, there are rockets raining down on the outskirts of the city. There's artillery fire that you can hear almost at all times. But I would say, Wolf, over the past couple of days, since the Ukrainians have been able to push the Russians back, the folks here in the city have just that little bit more room to breathe, if you will. You can see some more cars that are on the street that are out. There's some traffic on the streets as well. But you do see those. You see some of these units that you see here still making Molotov cocktails. We talked to some of those territorial defense units, and we asked them whether they believe that the Russians will try to come back and also how the situation is. Let's have a look.
Old businesses are returning to work. There are more and more shops open every day. And you can see even, even traffic is becoming much more denser than even 2 or 3 days ago.
And this is a really strong city with strong citizens, and we defend it a lot because this is the capital, and this is like logical that they would try to attack us more once again and again.
But you will win.
Yes, no doubts.
So as you can see, Wolf, there's a bit of confidence here about those territorial defense forces, but at the same time, of course, they do understand that the gains made so far are fragile, and of course, there is still a very dangerous army at the outskirts of the city, Wolf.
Fred Plankin reporting for us from Kyiv. Fred, thank you very, very much. Let's continue our analysis right now. Joining us, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Peter Zwak. He's the author of Swimming the Volga, U.S. Army Officers' Experience in Pre-Putin Russia. Phil Mattingly is also back with us as well. What about the White House today, General Zwak? The White House may be trying to do some damage control, but President Biden forcefully said that Putin, and I'm quoting now, cannot remain in power. Those words carry an enormous amount of weight. What's your reaction?
The president spoke his mind, and momentum should ultimately move Vladimir Putin out of power. Let's remind ourselves, we had an invasion a month ago, the scale of nothing we've seen in whatever you would say Europe since the invasion of Poland in 1939. And this was aggression in the macros level. Thousands of civilians have been killed, cities rubbled. That's the background of all of this. And Lviv just got hit just hours ago. So the president stated, he didn't say the United States was going to take the regime down, but supported it, if you will, morally and in principle. And here's what's fascinating, and I'm really glad that you mentioned it just earlier. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, sort of Putin's Joseph Goebbels, if you will, stated that should not be decided by Biden, by inference, the U.S. and the West. It should should only be Putin's removal a choice of the Russian people. There are two strategic fights. One, the fight in and for Ukraine, and then to project and push troops into the Russian Federation, which is a struggle that is beginning to look like it's beginning to take purchase, that gets at the very core of what the regime fears most, as its own people decide to remove.
You know, Phil, let's talk a little bit about the White House reaction to the president's ad lib line right at the end of his speech. Why is the White House doing this? Because just a week or so ago, they tried to walk back when President Biden called Putin a war criminal. They said he was just speaking from the heart. It wasn't an official statement or anything. But then a few days after that, the administration made a formal legal public designation by the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. Biden has called Putin a thug, a dictator, a butcher. Wouldn't it be appropriate if somebody who's a butcher, a murderous dictator, a pure thug, a war criminal, not be in power?
Well, I think two things can be true. You could wish or hope that President Putin is not in power while also not be calling for a regime change. And I think that was part of the clarity. I think the White House also sees it through, at least in talking to White House officials over the course of the last several weeks, is they've taken great pains not to kind of walk into the narrative often pushed by President Putin that this is just the United States pulling the strings here. This isn't about Ukraine. This is the U.S. behind Ukraine basically making all of this happen. They don't want to turn this into a U.S. versus Russia battle, although by proxy to some degree it has become one. And they've been very cautious to prevent anything that would lead to any type of an escalation, obviously with another nuclear power. They have maintained their forcefulness with NATO. They have obviously been sending lethal and economic aid to Ukraine, but they have attempted to draw the line in terms of the U.S. getting directly involved. And I think that is where the caution comes from here. To your point, though, and I think a really great point that was just made, if you look and read through the president's speech, obviously I was there, I listened to it, I've also read through it about 4 times since, so much of that speech was directed at the Russian people. So what Dmitry Peskov told Fred about the people being the ones who would choose the president was speaking directly to those Russian people throughout the course of the speech, making clear there's a difference between the Russian people and President Putin, making clear any pain they're feeling because of sanctions is because of President Putin, trying to separate them a little bit as well. And I think one of the concerns from White House officials was that that message would be lost and it would become more about the president versus President Putin. Wolf.
You know, Fred, just as President Biden was walking out to deliver this major speech, the mayor of Lviv in western Ukraine confirmed another strike on a city, just about 60 miles from the Polish border. So is the sense that Putin is trying to send a message?
Well, look, I think there certainly might have been a message in that, and that airstrike was very far to the west of the country, and obviously the U.S. president was in the neighbor country, not very far away. But it's one of the things that we've really seen in the past week or so, as the Russian forces have had much more difficulty in this war effort and have been pushed back here around Kyiv, also on some other front lines as well, is that they've been using a lot more of what the U.S. calls these standoff weapons, which means trying to strike places from longer distances. And you had that airstrike today. You can see that fuel depot burning there. Obviously, strategic location for the Russians. They attacked that with several cruise missiles. But it's not something that's necessarily been that uncommon. If we look at just yesterday, the Russians struck the Air Force headquarters of the Ukrainian Air Force in a place called Vinnytsia. They used 6 cruise missiles for that. The Ukrainians saying they shot 2 of those down. And right here in Kyiv yesterday, there was also an airstrike on a fuel depot here as well, south of the city, what the Russians say is the largest fuel depot that the Ukrainians still had that was intact at that point in time. They used a Caliber cruise missile for that. So the Russians trying to use those weapons, trying to weaken the Ukrainians' logistics, as at the same time, again, we have to point it out, the Russians clearly on the back foot, certainly here in Kyiv and in some other places as well. Wolf?
All right, guys, thank you very, very much. Coming up, President Biden sees the refugee crisis here in Poland firsthand today, accompanied by the mayor of Warsaw, who joins us live. That's coming up next as our breaking news coverage continues.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down for cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kyiv,
Dnipro, Poland.
This is CNN.
If we meet every commitment, if every country meets every commitment of the Paris Climate Accords, almost 50% of the world's energy is still going to come from natural gas and oil in 2040. And that means we need more investment in this sector, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. While at the same time, we need to be reducing emissions, and that's a top priority for us as well. In fact, the American Petroleum Institute came out with a policy just last year on how you can continue to invest in American oil and gas while at the same time reduce emissions. And we have a good record. In fact, in the power sector, just in the last 15 years, we've been able to reduce emissions by 40%. And most of that is because of a fuel switch that has gone on from coal to natural gas. We want to be able to continue to export that environmental progress throughout the world.
Cooking meat at high temperatures produces cancer-causing chemicals called heterocyclic amines, or HCAs. So what's a pitmaster to do? Well, marinate it. Marinating meat with antioxidant-rich spices for 30 minutes before you grill can lead to fewer of those dangerous chemicals being released. A National Institutes of Health study found store-bought powdered marinade containing rosemary and thyme could reduce the amount of carcinogens in cooked meat by up to 87%. And you can make a marinade yourself using your own herbs: basil, sage, thyme, oregano, and rosemary. Also, choose leaner meats. So instead of burgers or brats, try chicken, fish, grass-fed steak. Avoid overcooking or burning the meat on the outside. That's when cancer-causing chemicals are released. Those black char marks might look good, but they're what you want to avoid.
We're live here in Warsaw, Poland, where President Biden met today with some of the more than 2 million Ukrainians seeking refuge from the Russian invasion neighboring Ukraine. The president was accompanied by the mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, who is joining us right now. Rafał, thank you very much for joining us. You've been mayor here for more than 3 years. What was the President Biden's message to the Ukrainian refugees? And you walked around with him at the sports stadium, the soccer stadium, earlier today. What did you hear?
It was incredibly emotional because we've heard some heartbreaking stories, and the president was reassuring people and telling them that the United States of America will help Ukraine militarily with weapons, and will help the people. Also help the city of Warsaw with a plan to relocate 100,000 Ukrainians to the United States of America.
Which is really significant, but you got to give the Polish people so much credit. More than 3.5 million, maybe almost 4 million Ukrainians have fled the country to neighboring countries. More than half of them have come here to Poland. You've received them, you've opened the doors to them, and there are about, what, 300,000 or 350,000 right here in your city of Warsaw. So tell us what you need. I'm sure you're looking for some help.
Indeed, the population of my city went up by 15% in a month. And of course, this instinct of solidarity was just incredible. But much was based on improvisation. Of course, the government did its part on the border, but here it is the volunteers, it is the non-governmental organizations, all my social workers who work now with refugees. So we need a system. We need the European Union, the United Nations to help us out. We need a relocation system whereby we're going to share this burden together, because we are also doing our bit. The Ukrainians are fighting for our freedom and for the stability of the transatlantic alliance. We need to help them.
And the Polish government is really going way out, not only helping them with housing and with food, but with medical assistance as well for at least 3 years and maybe even longer.
Yes, and it is, again, most of the burden is on volunteers, non-government organizations, and us here, because the work is delegated on us. But yes, I mean, it is incredible because Ukrainians were granted almost a citizen-like status. They have access to free education, to free healthcare here in Poland, and that's great. I'm very proud of that solution. But of course, it puts an enormous strain on the city like mine, and our services are very much overstretched and overwhelmed. That's why we need assistance.
What did you think of the president's speech today?
It was very strong. I've heard everything that I wanted to hear. First of all, this pledge that the United States of America will defend every inch of NATO territory. It allows us to feel secure and to do our job on the ground, but also, those very strong words about Russia and about Putin, and that he's going to pay for that.
That he's a thug and a dictator and a butcher.
Yes.
And when the president of the United States says, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, I assume you agree.
Exactly, of course. And also, reminding us that democracy is so important. We had our share of problems with this government, with rule of law and so on and so forth. And now we need to be the strongest democracy in Europe, because we cannot afford to have a weak link on the eastern flank. We need to be strong.
Before I let you go, I've been here now for a couple of days, and I sense, at least in my conversations, that the Polish people are pretty nervous about Putin right now. They're wondering, is Ukraine his final stop, or could he start going after Poland?
That's why the president's words were so important to us, to reassure us that we are in it together. And really, when I look at President Zelensky, if he doesn't panic, we shouldn't panic.
So you're not panicking right now?
No,
but
not at all.
But you're a bit nervous.
We are just nervous about the future, but the most important thing now is to help those Ukrainian people who come in. You know, I've just talked to my friend Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, and he said, we can fight because you take care of our children and of our families. So we're doing our bid.
Mayor Trzaskowski, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show.
Of course. Thank you. Good luck to you. Good luck to all the people in Poland.
Thank you very much.
Up next, as the refugee crisis grows and grows by the hour, we're going to talk to one Ukrainian woman who was forced to flee her home but refuses to leave her country. The breaking news continues. We're live from Warsaw. Much more of our special coverage right after this.
In Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Weekdays on CNN.
Want a daily dose of Fareed and his team? Now you can get it with Fareed's Global Briefing, the newsletter that gives you the best insight and analysis on global affairs. Go to cnn.com/Fareed to sign up.
I want this show, One World, to be a place where people watching from all corners of the globe can understand why what happens in Africa has a huge impact on all of our lives in ways we might never even know. Because of my background, I am well aware of the vibrancy of this continent, and I want to show that to the world. People of my continent do deserve to be heard. We are rich in ways beyond the soil beneath our feet.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels. connected to your world.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Erin Burnett out front on CNN.
I'm Larry Madowo in Kilifi, Kenya, and this is CNN.
We're back live here in Warsaw, Poland, following the worst refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. More than 3.7 million people have now fled the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine. CNN senior national correspondent Ed Lavandera is working that part of the story for us. Ed, you're also here in Poland along the border with Ukraine. Poland alone has taken in more than 2 million refugees. Give our viewers a sense of what you're seeing.
Well, you know, Wolf, the situation has changed dramatically here at the train station in Przemyśl, Poland, just a few miles away from the border. This is where refugees arrive by train, and really they start leaving by train here. This area, just a couple weeks ago, was jam-packed with people, some 50,000 to 60,000 people a day coming here through this station. It has slowed down dramatically, but the people continue to come. In fact, city officials here in Przemyśl told us earlier today that there are still about 1,000 people arriving by train here at this station, and also several thousand more arriving every day at the border checkpoint, walking across, people who have driven here. So the need for humanitarian help continues, even though we're not seeing the surge of numbers that we saw in the early part of this crisis. But it continues to move on, especially the concern is when you see airstrikes like we saw earlier today in Lviv. There are so many people in eastern Ukraine who have moved to the western part of the country. The concern is that if warfare heightens in the western part of the country, that many people who are seeking refuge there might continue to pour into countries into Europe like Romania and Poland as well. So there is that underlying concern that still remains here. But the flow of refugees continues here, Wolf, even though it's more controlled. And the push here right now, Wolf, is when they land here to move them deeper into Poland. So there's a system of trains and buses ready to move a lot of these people out from this city on the border. Wolf?
It's very impressive what the Polish people are doing indeed. Ed Lavandera on the border. He's in Poland along the border with Ukraine. Thank you very much. The decision to flee certainly is one of the hardest that so many of these refugees have ever faced. Anastasia Parskasovova documented her family's emotion, her emotion leaving Kharkiv, which Russia has now reduced to rubble. Listen to this.
I'm not going to take much because I'm hoping I will return soon enough. My sister says it's like going on a trip, but an awful one, I guess.
So, as my parents can no longer withstand it, the constant bombing, especially after last night, which was truly a terrifying thing, we are going to leave, if we live that long, of course. So, I don't want to leave, and I won't be leaving Ukraine. We will be moving to somewhere just farther away from Russian border. I don't know why, but being bombarded is easier than leaving your home.
Anastasia is joining us now live. Anastasia, thank you so much for joining us. Heartbreaking indeed. Tell us why you decided to flee your home in Kharkiv and why you decided to stay in Ukraine rather than leaving the country altogether, as so many others have done.
Well, I prefer to remain in Kharkiv, and still I would have been in Kharkiv right now if it wasn't for my parents, who were no longer able to withstand the terrifying bombings, explosions, constant fear for your life, going outside to even find water, drinkable water, is a quest that could could result in your death. So this kind of pressure is obviously harder for them, as they are our parents and they are older than me and my sister. So we, mostly for them, decided to leave Kharkiv with a really hard feeling, filled with regret and even some shame for leaving people who cannot leave or will not leave. Many of my friends are still there in Kharkiv. But a compromise was with our parents that we are not leaving Ukraine, that we are staying here I am in Poltava currently. It's kind of close to Kharkiv. That we will stay here and we will support our country in any way we can.
That's wonderful to hear how courageous you are, Anastasia. Russia claims, as you well know, this is Putin's regime. They claim they're trying to protect people just like you, Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. So what's your message to Putin? How do you respond to his claim? And it's a claim he's simply trying to protect the Russian speakers of Ukraine.
Honestly, the words we Russian-speaking people that he has used, and Russians as people as a whole have used as an excuse to invade countries, not only Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, the repeated cycle. We are so fed up with it. It's I cannot say it on TV how I feel about it, honestly, but just it's heartbreaking for us to be this bait for him. But at the same time, we are the ones who hate him and what Russians are doing the most. We are Russian speaking, we understand them, we know everything they say, all the propaganda, all the narratives, and it's all complete, utter lies. I have never been prosecuted for speaking Russian. It's ridiculous. The whole city of Kharkiv speaks Russian. We have a complete choice what language we want to speak, Ukrainian or Russian. It's never been a problem. It's a made-up story that just is used for aggression, for excusing aggression and war, obviously. And
Putin in the process has leveled so much of Kharkiv. Anastasia, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck to you. Good luck to your family. And we're hoping for the best. You are very, very courageous, and we're grateful to you for telling us what you feel. Thank you so much. An important note to our viewers as well, for information about how you can help humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, go to cnn.com/impact and help impact your world. Just ahead, President Biden says Putin cannot remain in power. Do American allies agree? I'll ask the French ambassador to the United States right after a quick break. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room. We're live from Warsaw, Poland.
Each hall is about 10,000 square meters, as you see here.
To get more insight into the kingdom's strategy, I met up with the Minister of Industry, Commerce and Tourism at one of the country's flagship projects, the Bahrain International Exhibition and Convention Center. This massive space is said to be the region's largest exhibition center when it opens later this year.
Bahrain was already under pressure economically. Before the pandemic brought along with it a lot more pain. But the country was already on the path of trying to diversify away from oil and gas. Do you think that's actually doable?
If you talk primarily about diversification, it's not new to us. We've done it before. Before oil, we didn't have oil. We were a pearling nation. We went from pearling to oil, to industry, to banking, to telecoms, and I'm sure we'll find more and more as we go along. I think the biggest asset in Bahrain is the Bahrainis themselves.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley.
Weekdays on CNN.
To open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
It's so great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest. I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them? Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair. It was an unprecedented move, very eerie. All the roads have been closed off. Describe the theme that you arrived to. The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying. Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest. We continue to monitor the government in crisis. This was the Duchess's first news interview. Rare access indeed. That's what it's all about. Max Foster, CNN.
I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Breaking news, President Biden closes a very fiery and passionate speech here in Warsaw, Poland, with truly stunning remarks declaring Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. But the White House denies the president is calling for regime change in Russia. Joining us now to discuss is the French ambassador to the United States, Philippe Etienne. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. Does the French government agree with what President Biden said today? The White House later tried to walk back his words a bit, that Putin cannot remain in power.
Well, thank you. Well, let me speak on a personal note, because I lived in Russia. I learned the language. And what we see, this horrible war started by Russia against Ukraine, is not what I know from the Russian people. France, like the other European countries, has supported politically, materially, the investigation started by the International Criminal Court. The priority, Wolf, now is to get to a ceasefire, and also to take the humanitarian actions, as we try to do, for the refugees, for the displaced persons like Anastasia, and also for the besieged populations like in Mariupol. And for this, we have displayed a strong unity of the international, of the allied, of the partners in the summits. You have covered the summits in Brussels. And there is a strong unity to increase the pressure, to increase the price paid by Russia for its aggression, and to increase the support to the Ukrainian people. This is a priority, to get to a ceasefire.
Well, let me ask you, do you agree with President Biden? Today he called Putin a butcher. He says in recent days he's a pure thug, a murderous dictator, and a war criminal. Do you agree that Putin is all of that?
everybody is horrified by the constant bombing, shellings on Ukrainian cities. As I told you, we have, as France, but more than 30 countries, including the European Union members, we have decided to support materially and politically the investigation launched by the International Criminal Court. And we focus on action in a strong unity among us and in close coordination with the President of Ukraine, with President Volodymyr Zelensky, on all possible efforts to get to the ceasefire, to get to the end of these atrocities.
Do you agree with President Biden that Russia should be removed from the G20?
We have been working in a strong unity among allies and partners to isolate Russia. We have had a new vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations. And in all international organizations, we raise the issue. We raise also the consequences of the aggression by Russia, not only against or for the Ukrainian people, who are the first victims, but also for the whole community. This aggression is a violation of the Charter of the United Nations and also constitutes a grave threat for other vulnerable countries. And we have raised this issue also in this international organization of food security. Food security now is a big, big challenge because of what the war started by Russia against Ukraine. So yes, we try to raise this issue in all international organizations to condemn this aggression and to use all fora to do this.
You're an excellent diplomat, but I'll take your answer, Mr. Ambassador, as a yes. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Philippe Etienne of France. We appreciate it very, very much. Up next, a key Ukrainian city struggles to return to some semblance of normal life amid the rubble after Russian forces are pushed back.
There were those who said it was a dream. And yet independence made the dream come true. Today, in the biggest delta on Earth, one of the fastest growing GDPs is a reality. Because here, medicine, food and garments for the world are made. For the year of the Golden Jubilee celebration of independence, the dream has never been more real. Because dreams are made in Bangladesh.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source. In a special ongoing season of the Tug of War podcast, CNN reporters are on the ground in Ukraine, documenting Russia's invasion, the escalating conflict, and what it means for the rest of the world. Tug of War. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The IWC Big Pilots Watch is a modern version of a navigation watch that was made in very, very small numbers during World War II. It was a kind of watch, what's called a Beobachtunguhr, an observation watch, and it was designed for navigation in the cockpit. So the modern Big Pilots Watch was not a reissue, not an identical reissue to the original. It had a new mechanism, but it was sort of an expression of the connection between IWC and its history as a maker of aviation watches. It's a watch that really is all about legibility and precision in the air. As a navigation instrument, there's simply no room for error. And it remains today one of the icons of modern watch design and one of the watches that helped to really kickstart the big watch craze of the early 2000s.
Sex trafficking is happening in all hotels, in all brands, at all levels. My name is Lori Cohen. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ECPAT USA in Brooklyn, New York. In our research, we recognize that so much of the child sex trafficking was happening in hotels because these were anonymous locations and traffickers felt that there was very low risk in being detected. In February of 2020, ECPAT USA partnered with Marriott International and with the American Hotel and Lodging Association to launch a free online training for people working in the hotel and hospitality industry. It was just before the pandemic, and we thought the timing was going to be terrible. But when we counted the numbers, 15 months into the pandemic, we were stunned to see that over 500,000 members of the hotel industry had taken the online training. And so even though it's an uncomfortable topic, there's a recognition that it's absolutely essential to protect children. It's the right thing to do, and it's also good for their bottom line.
We're live here in Warsaw, Poland. We're following breaking news. Russia signaling a major shift in strategy after meeting fierce resistance in key Ukrainian cities, and that includes the key port of Mykolaiv. CNN senior international correspondent Ben Wiedemann is joining us from there right now. Ben, you're obviously now in nearby Odessa, but what did you see?
What we saw is a city that, Wolf, about a week ago was still very much in the grips of war. And even though the Russians have been pulled back, you can still hear the rumbles of war just over the horizon. Once more, the people of Mykolaiv can have their daily bread. I see a change, says Maxim. Now it's getting back to normal, and I really hope it'll last. The Ukrainian army and volunteer fighters have pushed Russian forces east, sparing this port city, blocking Russia's push to seize the country's entire western Black Sea coast. The supermarkets are fully open, even if some shelves are empty, fresh milk still missing. Alexander and his family seem to savor the mundane task of grocery shopping. He begins to tell us the Russians have been stopped when his wife Svetlana interrupts him to say, "We're still afraid." On the surface, life seems to be resuming most of its regular rhythms, but that's just the surface. All over the city, there are piles of these old tires intended to be set alight to obscure the vision of invading Russian forces. And there are also among the tires Molotov cocktails. Around the city, signs of destruction. This empty hotel struck several days ago in the early afternoon. Natasha was at home nearby when it happened. In this predominantly ethnic Russian city, she scoffs at the idea Russia is waging war on her behalf.
Not for our country and not for Russian people.
The Red Cross has turned this wedding hall into a center providing medicine, diapers, and other supplies. What they can't provide, however, is a sense this nightmare is coming to an end. And of course, Russian forces have been pushed back further to the east from here, but it's important to keep in mind that, of course, Odessa and all these cities along the Black Sea are vulnerable to Russian